Okay, again, good morning, everyone. Our topic for today is about relevant costing. I will not discuss any more as to the disadvantages and advantages of relevant costing. I will immediately proceed to the first topic, okay, of relevant costing. But before to the first topic that I want to discuss today, I will again refresh you for a little bit no on the definition lang of a relevant cost. But I will not discuss in details what are the relevant costs because the material that I uploaded in your portal um, was already complete as to what are the types of relevant cost and irrelevant cost as well. In relevant costing, what we need to determine are the relevant cost. The relevant costs are costs that are considered differ across alternatives. Ibig sabihin po nun, a relevant cost guys, if this cost, for example, the cost of um, acquiring a particular the cost of a particular thing no from one alternative to another alternative is different to each other. Ibig sabihin magkaiba sila, whether material yung difference o hindi, it means those costs are relevant because it will change your decision. Yung sinasabi pong irrelevant cost, these are costs that will never change the decision. For instance, no? Okay, the cost on fare, pamasahe. Okay, if you're going to acquire 10,000 number of units, the cost is 300. If you're going to acquire less than 10,000, 300 pa rin yung fare. So obviously, those cost is irrelevant because there is no difference between two alternatives. So in relevant costing, what are we going to determine only are costs that would make any difference across the alternatives. Okay? There are many short-term decision making, okay, but we will focus for only around seven, okay, short-term decision-making problems. But for today, we will focus on one. Okay, and the succeeding days that will come, okay, we will focus on the rest of the relevant cost problems. Today, we will discuss on make or buy, which is a non-routinary activity in any business organization. The make or buy decision guide is simple. Okay, the question is that should the part or product be manufactured? Ibig sabihin, in-sourced or should the product be made, no? Or bought or outsourced from outside suppliers? That is the question that we need to answer under relevant costing, no? The process on relevant costing. Dapat bang bumili na lang po tayo or dapat gumawa na lang tayo? Take note, a component or an item used on a particular product can be produced by the organization, and the organization producing it will require costs. Same with, no, if you're going to acquire those item outside the organization, yung tinatawag na mga ready-made na mga products, okay, for the purpose of producing a finished good, kasi pwede naman siyang mabili, has a different cost. Okay? However, there are costs on two alternatives that can be considered irrelevant because the cost of making it and the cost of buying it, that cost, a specific cost, will never change. No? Okay? So we need to segregate first what are the relevant costs and irrelevant costs. Okay? How are we going to do that? So for today, I prepared two different illustrative problems to show on identifying what are the relevant costs and what are irrelevant costs. And then, in the said problem, we can able to identify which is more advantageous on the part of the company. Okay? Sir, question. Sa decision guide ba, yun lang ba yung tinatanong, should we make or should we buy? Kasi if the company is willing na bumili na lang without thinking of making it, okay po ba yun? Well, it is the decision of the company. But for the purpose of providing um, ano ba, advices, no? Okay? If you are consulted by the organization, okay, whether to make or buy the particular component, the relevant costing is very much helpful because we can able to identify which alternative is most advantageous on the part of the company. If I say advantageous, hindi po malulugi yung company. Instead, mas makakasave sila. Yun po yung ibig sabihin ng advantageous. Okay? So let's begin with problem number 1, no? Okay? Problem number 1. Mayamuit Corporation manufactures um, a component a component part with the following standard cost. Okay? Direct materials 6 pesos, direct labor 15 pesos, factory overhead 60 pesos, and standard cost at around 81 pesos. Now, so the total standard cost on the particular component, if it is going to be manufactured, is 81 pesos. Okay, it composed of direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Okay, and the factory overhead is applied at 2 pesos per standard direct labor hour. Take note of that statement, that factory overhead is applied at 2 pesos per standard direct labor hour. Halatang halata naman po sa problem that in every, no, um, 2 piso po yung applied, no, na factory overhead that is dependent on the standard direct labor hour. Okay, 30% of the applied factory overhead is fixed and is not affected by any make or buy decision. Okay, take note of that statement again also. That 30% of the applied factory overhead is fixed and is not affected by any make or buy decision. So, ibig sabihin, the 30% of the make or of the said factory overhead, whether you going to make the particular product or you're going to buy that product, that fixed factory overhead will exist pa rin, no, at the same amounts, pareho yung mga amounts, no, sa cost to buy, sa cost to make, yung 30% na yon magi-exist pa rin. Okay, another on this statement is that, okay, the component part can be purchased from outside suppliers at 73 pesos per unit. Okay. And then we are required to compute the relevant cost of make and the relevant cost of buy. No, these are two different alternatives. The alternative of making the component and the alternative of buying the component. So let us determine first what are the relevant costs. Okay? So, we have an alternative to make, okay, alternative to make, and we have alternative to buy. Okay, so the first um cost that we can able to identify is the direct material provided, no, the direct material is used if we are going to make the said component, tama. Pero that direct material cannot be observed in the alternative of buying the component because if you buy the particular component, you don't need any more materials, no, to make the component. So therefore, direct material is a relevant cost. Okay? Under the component of, under the alternative of make, no, kasi mag-i-exist siya sa make pero hindi siya mag-i-exist sa buy. Okay, yun po ibig sabihin nun. Another is that direct labor, no, direct labor will exist if you're going to make the component, but that labor requirement will not exist if you are going to buy the component. Ibig sabihin, hindi na po ako mag-hire ng mga empleyado to make that such component if I'm going to buy it. Therefore, if I'm going to buy the component, wala po akong magagastos. Pero if I'm going to make the component, meron po akong gagastusin para ipagawa yung component. So meaning, merong pagkakaiba sa gagastusin as to the labor. Sa alternative of buying, no? Wala. Pero on the alternative to make the component, meron amounting to 15 pesos. And then, we have factory overhead. No, we have factory overhead. On the factory overhead, take note, meron po tayong statement dyan that the 30% of the applied factory overhead is fixed, no? And is not affected by any make or buy decisions. That's correct. Any fixed cost in general, that's the rule, no? Any fixed cost in general, rule, that's the general rule, no? Again, that is general rule. Therefore, there are exceptions to that rule. All fixed costs are considered irrelevant. Bakit? Kasi whatever alternative you have, the fixed cost remain unchanged and it will exist. Unless otherwise, there is a qualifying statement in the problem saying that the fixed cost will be eliminated to other alternatives. But if the problem is silent as to the fixed cost, it is presumed and assumed that the fixed cost is irrelevant because the reason of that is yung fixed cost, whether on your, if it is in alternative A and then it is in alternative B, nandun po yung amount na yon at hindi po yon mawawala at equal silang dalawa. Therefore, wala pong difference, no? So that is irrelevant. So, ano pong factory overhead lang ang i-consider natin? Well, obviously, we will only consider the variable factory overhead, which amounting to, take note, the value of the factory overhead as its totality is 60 pesos and only 70% of which is considered as the, what we called, variable and relevant cost. Okay, based on the observation that we have, direct material, direct labor, factory overhead, these are variable cost already, no? Direct material is a variable cost, direct labor is a variable cost, and the factory overhead that we recognize on the alternative to make is relevant, is a variable cost. So we can now conclude, no, in general, no, general rule again, in general, that all variable costs are considered relevant costs. Unless otherwise, there are qualifying statement that would say that that variable cost will remain unchanged regardless of alternative, no? If it will remain unchanged, it will not affect it will not be affected by any alternatives. Well, that variable cost can be considered as irrelevant kasi yung nature naman ng relevant cost, going back to its definition, the relevant cost is a cost that would differ across any alternatives. Okay. How about, meron pa po ba tayong additional cost? Wala na po. On the alternative to make, yun lang po yung cost na dapat i-recognize. Ito pong factory overhead is applied at 2 pesos per direct labor hour is not relevant, no? This is not relevant in alternative to make or buy, no? It will never affect naman. Okay, it will never affect whether you buy the component or you're going to make the component. So what is the other relevant cost that we are going to identify? Well, obviously the cost relevant to the alternative of buying the component. Once we buy the component, sinabi sa problem that the component part can be purchased from outside supplier at 73 pesos per unit. That is the purchase price, no? If that purchase price will exist on the alternative to buy because that is the value of the component if you're going to buy it. But that purchase price will be disregarded if we are going to make the component. So, ibig sabihin, the purchase price is a relevant cost on the part of buying because that is a cost of buying the component, but it's not a cost of making the component. So, we have 73. Okay? So those are the relevant costs pertaining to alternative to make and alternative to buy. If we're going to determine the total relevant cost, kasi minsan tinatanong naman ito sa actual board exam, that what is the total relevant cost of making the component, or what is the total relevant cost of buying the component. Well, if it is us, no, and it is us naman in the problem, the alternative to make the total relevant cost is the sum of all relevant costs determined. So that is 63 pesos. And the total alternative or the relevant cost for alternative to buy is 73 pesos. From that, no, from determining the total relevant cost of making the component and determining the total relevant cost of buying the component, we can now able to identify whether to make the component or buying the component. Take note that if we're going to make the component, we are going to incur expense around 63 pesos. And then for alternative of buying, that is 73 pesos. So if you are the management of this particular organization, I would prefer of making the component, because the component, no, of making the component will save, no, of around 10 pesos, kasi magiging mahal kung bibili tayo. That would be our savings. So we have 10 pesos savings. Okay? So should the company make or buy? Yes, that is, we need to make the component because there will be a net savings, a saving of a 10 pesos if we are going to make the component. Naiintindihan po ba? Naiintindihan po ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay. A- any questions? Any questions?
None so far, sir.
Okay, let us proceed to the next problem, no? Let us proceed to the next problem pertaining pa rin sa making and buying, no? Making and buying. But let us kuwan, no? In upgrade the problem. Kasi if we're going to observe, no, masyadong basic yung problem number 1. Okay? Sige. Okay. Problem number 2. Okay? Sangsang machines uses one unit of a component part. The foot pedal for each unit of its product, okay? The foot pedal for each unit of its product. The cost to produce a unit, okay? The cost to produce, take note ha, the cost to produce, okay? The A unit of a foot pedal is as follows: direct material 500, material handling 50, direct labor 950, and factory overhead 1,900. There is a statement here that is very much important later on if we are going to answer this item. Material handling cost is applied based on the cost of material and purchase components. Take note, ha? There is a handling cost, okay, on the cost of materials and on the purchase components. Okay? If we're going to purchase the component, you will incur a material handling cost. If you're going to acquire a material, no, of making the component, you will also okay, incur a material handling cost. Okay? Factory overhead is applied based on direct labor cost. Okay? Based on direct labor cost. 60% of the applied factory overhead cost is fixed. Okay, 60% of the applied factory overhead cost is fixed. So therefore, 40% of which is considered variable. Sanction is considering to outsource. Pag sinabing outsource, to buy it outside, no? The foot pedal. Okay. A supplier, Pajak Corporation, a manufacturer of foot pedals, had offered to supply the part to Sand, to Sang, no? To Sang. Okay, at a price of 2,200. So that is the purchase price if we are going to acquire the particular component outside. Okay. Sang's average requirement, take note the average requirement for foot pedals per month is 500 units. Okay. Accordingly, Pajak can meet this requirement. Should Sang decide to outsource this component? Take note, ha, Sang is requiring 500 units of foot pedals. And according to Pajak, he can able to meet that requirement of 500 units. Okay, so those are the facts of the problem. We have two requirements in this case. Letter A, assume that should Sang outsource the foot pedal, the facilities used to produce this component part would just remain idle. Ano po ibig sabihin, just would remain idle? Ibig po sabihin, if we're going to buy the foot pedal and we are going to not, we're not going to use no the equipment of producing the foot pedal, oh, hindi na po natin yung gagamitin, nakastock lang, okay, at hindi natin pinarenta sa iba, that is, that means, yung equipment na yon is idle, no? Nakatenga lang, okay, nakatenga. Okay, which alternative is more advantageous and how much? Okay, that's the question. That is the requirement. If the assumption is that the component, the equipment or the facilities used in the component part would just remain idle, okay, and assuming that foot pedal can able to meet the requirements of song. That's the circumstance on the first requirement. Letter B, assume that if the foot pedal is purchased, binili sa labas, the facilities used to produce it could be rented to another company for 100,000 pesos. So, ibig sabihin, instead of making it nakatenga on the company, you make it rent out to others so that you can earn an income of 100,000 pesos. Okay? Which alternative is more advantageous and how much? Okay. So let us begin with requirement letter A. No? Letter A. Okay? Again, we have two different alternative pa rin. The alternative of making or in source. That's the other term for making. And the alternative of buying or what we called outsource. Okay? Sige. Una, okay, sinabi po natin kanina sa first problem that all relevant costs can be considered, okay, relevant cost to make, no? A relevant cost to make, no? Okay, based on the problem, okay, sabi naman, no, the cost to produce a unit of a foot pedal is as follows. We have direct materials and direct labor. That is clear, no? That we are going to incur those costs if we're going to make the particular component. We have DM, we have direct labor. Okay, the DM and the direct labor. DM, the value of the DM is 500. Okay, 500. And the value of the direct labor is 950. Okay? Those are relevant costs to um, make. Okay? Those are relevant costs to make. Okay? But those costs will not be reflected on the alternative of buying it because we don't need material and labor if we're going to buy the component. Okay. Another another component is the fixed factory overhead. However, from the fixed factory overhead, no, 60% of which is considered fixed. And again, as what I have mentioned before, all fixed costs are considered irrelevant unless otherwise there is a qualifying statement saying that this fixed cost can be a relevant cost or tend to be relevant cost or a circumstance in the problem saying that this fixed cost will differ from two different alternatives. The mere fact that the problem did not provide any qualifying statement pertaining to the said fixed cost, the assumption is that the fixed cost is irrelevant. And whether we are going to make it and buy it, the same value, the same amount, and it will never change. So, therefore, the fixed factory overhead that we only recognize as relevant cost is the 40% because 60% of which yung total factory overhead stipulated in the problem is fixed cost. So therefore, the 60% of which, so 1,900, 40% of which is considered variable and it is a relevant cost under make. Okay? Ayun, no? Another statement that we need to consider is the material handling cost is applied based on the cost of material and purchase component. At first glance, you would say, oh, the material handling cost ko no, is applied based on the cost of materials and purchase component. Some students make some irregularities on understanding the statement. They tend na sinasabi na lang, irrelevant yung material handling cost kasi kung ano yung material handling cost of acquiring the direct material is yun din yung value ng material handling cost of acquiring the ready-made component. That interpretation is wrong, no? That interpretation is wrong kasi take note, the term provided is based on cost. Based on cost. Ibig sabihin, in determination of the value of the material handling cost, it is based on the actual cost of the direct material or the actual cost of the purchase component. Yun po ibig sabihin nun. So if we're going to examine, no, the 50 pesos, if it is based on the direct material, ibig sabihin that the material handling cost is 0.1 or equivalent to 10% of the cost. Okay, no? That is equivalent to 10% of the cost. Therefore, the material handling cost, we can now say that it is 10% of the materials acquired or of the purchase component. Yun po ibig sabihin nun. Okay, guys? Sige. Naintindihan ba yon sa material handling cost? Okay? Naintindihan ba? Okay? Guys. Okay. Sige. Para ma-illustrate, no? Ibig sabihin po nun, because of making it, we are going to acquire direct materials and we have able to identify the percentage of material handling cost. Okay? That is 10% multiplied by the 500, that is 50. So, ibig sabihin, if we're going to acquire direct materials, gagastos po tayo ng 50 pesos for every material we acquired for the handling cost. Yun po ibig sabihin nun. Pero yung 50 na yan, hindi po rin yan yung magre-reflect on the part of buying. Bakit? Because the material handling cost will be based on the purchase price if you are going to buy the component. Yun po ibig sabihin nun. Okay? Okay ba yun? Naiintindihan ba yung ibig kong sabihin on the material handling cost? Guys? Okay? Sige. Anyway, kung hindi pa maintindihan, well, I will proceed, no, on the um relevant cost of buying. On if we're going to buy, if we're going to buy the particular component, if we're going to buy the particular component, we just need to consider the purchase price. Take note, the purchase price is 2,200. And then, meron din po yan siyang material handling cost. Material handling cost. Kung naging 50 rin yung material handling cost of buying, the material handling cost will be irrelevant. Pero kasi sinabi sa problem that the material handling cost will be based on the purchase price of the component, that will be 10% multiplied by 2,200, the material handling cost that the company will incur if they are going to purchase the component is 220, which is higher than the material handling cost on making it, because the material handling cost on making it was based on the 500 pesos cost of direct materials. So, magkaiba pa rin. So, the material handling cost here is a relevant cost. And then there are no other um, value, no? There are no other value that will affect, no? That will affect the said, okay? That will affect the said, okay? The said components. So the total relevant cost of making it would be amounting to two, 2,260. Hello? 2,260. And the, and, hello?
Parang wala yung audio.
Okay. Okay. Um, s- how about, iton? Okay. So relevant cost the total relevant cost of making, no, is 2,260. On the part of buying it, okay, that would be the total, okay, of material handling cost and purchase price. So, based on the first assumption, na idle lang yung facility producing the component, and then the company can able um to meet the requirement, no, the company, um the company that can supply the component can meet the requirement. We can say here that based on the solution that we have, if we're going to make the component, we will just incur cost of 2,260. But if we're going to buy the component, we are going to incur cost of 2,420. From the both relevant costs, no, which do you think is more advantageous? Obviously, the more advantageous alternative is making the component, because we are going to save of around how much? Magkano kaya ang savings if we are going to make the component instead of buying it? Well, we will have a savings of 160 pesos per component. Okay? But as to the totality, that would be 160 multiplied by 500, kasi 500 naman yung required units. The total savings that we will have is 80,000 pesos. Again, this 160 is the savings per unit, but if the question asked is the totality of savings, that would be 160 savings per unit, multiplying it to the number of units, okay, to be acquired or to make. In this case, because the number of units to be acquired is 500 units, or the number of units to be produced is 500, the total savings, if we opt to choose of making the component, is 80,000 pesos. Okay. Naiintindihan po ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sige. How about on the second requirement? Requirement B. The only changes on requirement B is that, ito yon, no? The only changes is that yung facility daw na gagamitin can be rented out to another company. Okay. There is an opportunity cost there, no? There is an opportunity cost, okay? Or there is a rental income, no? There is a rental income. Okay. So, to be more specific, meron pong rental income na ma ma o-obtain if we are going to buy the if we're going to buy the said component. So if that is an if that is an income on the part of choosing a buying, no? A buying the component, saan kaya yan considered as relevant cost? Guys, obviously it will be part as relevant cost of buying it, no? So for analysis, no, kasi yung 2260 yun pa rin naman yon, that is 2260 pa rin naman yan, kasi wala naman pong magbabago as to the value of making the material, and then wala rin namang magbabago on acquiring except na magkakaroon lang ng additional income. Okay, kasi you can rent out, no, the said facility. Okay, so all we need to do is, if that is 2260, multiplying it to the number of units required. So let us multiply it to the number of units required. Okay, that is 500 units naman ng kailangan. 500 units. Okay? So, 500 units of buying, 500 units of making. Okay? Magkano kaya yung totality nun? That is 2,260. That is 1,130,000. And on the part of buying it, makakagastos po tayo ng 1,210,000. And then from the 1,210,000, sabi pa sa problem, magkakaroon ng income kasi makakabawi naman tayo. Parang sinasabi, bibili ka for 1,210,000 pero may re-rent out mo yung facility. So, parang merong babalik rin naman sa'yo na 100, that is less rent income. Rent income, saan kaya natin yun ibabawas? Well, ibabawas po natin yun on the alternative of buying it, kasi parang babawiin po niya yung 100,000 pesos pertaining to the cost of buying the component. So lalabas that the total relevant cost of making, or I mean of buying the component, will tend to be 1,110,000 na lang, because from the 1,210,000 we can expect that there will be a cash inflow of 100,000. So ibig sabihin, instead of 1,210,000 po yung nagastos natin, ibabawas yung pumasok na 100,000 na naging income natin because we rent out the facility that we have in making the component. Lalabas yung magagastos lang talaga natin at net is 1,110,000. And then on the part of making it, yun pa rin naman yung totality na magagastos, 1,130,000. So between the two, ano po kaya ang most advantageous? Obviously, the most advantageous is buying the component, because we can save on buying the component around 20,000 pesos. Yun po ang magiging sagot natin on requirement letter B. Okay? So, those are the most common, no, transactions and circumstances that may affect on making and buying na decision making. Okay? Once again, the decision guide, okay, whether in making and um, buying problem, no, is which among the alternative is most advantageous on the part of the company, or in layman's terms naman, no, parang sinasabi na saan ba sa dalawang alternative ang magkakasave po tayo. Yun lang naman po ang ang target po natin on determining the relevant cost of making or buying. Ang pinaka-crucial po na part on the making or buying is the identification of the relevant cost. Yun lang po ang pinaka-crucial na part on the making and buying decision. Okay? So, that's it.